Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the public hearing on the proposed changes to the water measurement and reporting regulations. My name is Abby Warner, and I'm an environmental scientist at the State Water Board, and I will be facilitating today's hearing. As a quick note, we have instituted additional security measures for State Water Board Zoom meetings. All attendees are muted and unable to share their screens by default. In addition, you can only join the Zoom meeting from one device. All Zoom registration links are individualized, so please do not share your registration links with others. Under the rulemaking provisions of the California Administrative Procedure Act, also referred to as the APA, this is the time and place set for the presentation of statements, arguments, and contentions orally or in writing for or against these changes in the State Water Board's regulations, notice of which was previously published and sent by email to interested parties. This hearing will consist of a staff presentation and a public comment section. These presentation slides are already available on the regulation rulemaking website. The purpose of this hearing is to obtain public comments on the board's proposal. The board will not respond to comments at this hearing, nor will the board engage in a discussion about regulations at this hearing. If you would like to discuss the regulations with staff outside of the hearing, our contact information is included in the next slide. The board will take all oral comments presented at this hearing and all written comments submitted during the public comment period and provide a written response to comments in the final statement of reasons in accordance with the APA. This hearing is being recorded and transcribed by a certified shorthand court reporter. The transcript of the hearing and all exhibits and evidence presented during the hearing will be part of the public rulemaking file. Next slide, please. Let's go over the logistics for today. If you do not intend to provide oral comments, we encourage you to attend the hearing via the webcast instead of through Zoom. The link is provided on the screen and can be reached at video.calepa.ca.gov. If you do intend to provide oral comments during the hearing, please make sure that you are in the Zoom meeting or register using the link shown on the screen, which is at bit.ly/water measurement hearing. You can also register using the QR code shown here. You will then receive an email confirmation with the Zoom meeting details and will be able to join us via Zoom or telephone. Anyone is welcome to join the Zoom meeting at any time throughout the hearing. If you have any questions you'd like to ask staff, or if you would like to submit a written comment, please email us at dwr-measurement@waterboards.ca.gov. Next slide, please. Today's hearing will start with a staff presentation about the existing regulations and proposed changes. Then we will take a short break before hearing the oral public comments. To begin the staff presentation, I'd like to ask Pablo to give us a brief overview of the existing regulations.
Thanks so much, Abby. My name is Pablo Ortiz. I'm an environmental scientist with the Division of Water Rights, and I'll be presenting on the existing water measurement and reporting regulations. The measurement and reporting regulations, often referred to as SB 88, have been in effect since 2016 and generally require diverters to measure their diversions and submit that data to the board. The smallest water rights, those authorized to divert only 10 acre-feet or less, are not subject to these regulations. They must still file annual reports describing how much water was diverted each month, but they don't need to adhere to any of the requirements described in sections 931 through 938 of the existing regulations. Anyone authorized to divert more than 10 acre-feet is subject to the regulations and must measure and report their diversions and submit their data as an attachment to their annual reports. While general annual reporting requires monthly diversion totals, these regulations increase the resolution of data by requiring measurements be collected at a specific frequency and accuracy. The largest users, those diverting over 10,000 acre-feet per year, or 30 cubic feet per second from June to September, must also post near real-time data to a public website. You'll often hear people refer to this provision as the telemetry requirement. It's important to note that these applicability thresholds also apply to a combination of water rights that divert from the same point of diversion, divert to the same reservoir, or serve the same place of use. Since the purpose of these regulations is to collect high-quality diversion data for use in water rights administration, it's important for that data to be accessible and easily interpreted by the board. Here's a snapshot of the data we received for water year 2023. Of the 12,000 water rights or so that are subject to measurement and reporting regulations, only about 23% of the associated annual reports contained at least one measurement data file. Of those, only about 7% had data files that included descriptive column headers in the first row and included date, time, and volume as column headers. Having clear column names in the first row of a data file is essential to creating a robust database that could be efficiently used and analyzed without individual review. So of the original 12,000 water rights, less than 2% met the needs of the division. Instead, we receive over 1,000 unique data file formats in any given year. Combined with the missing data from the majority of diverters, this makes it virtually impossible to do any kind of mass analysis of the data. Before proposing regulation revisions, the division spent several years trying to understand the causes of low rates of data file submission and developing solutions to improve compliance. Staff conducted extensive outreach in 2023, including meeting one-on-one with several large diverters, holding public listening sessions, providing plain language guidance materials, and hosting compliance assistance workshops. We hoped this outreach would result in greater compliance, but the resulting improvements in water year 2023 were modest at best. As demonstrated by the chart on the screen, trends in data file submission have been fairly stable since the regulation was first implemented. There have been some minor increases in the percentage of water rights that have submitted data files at the bottom in green, but that number has hovered around 20%. A majority of diverters still don't submit any measurement info to the board at the top in red, or submit only information on their device, but no accompanying data file in orange. Even with the extensive outreach and guidance efforts the board has undertaken, the rate of data submission and the quality of data we receive has not significantly improved. Outreach seems to have only been able to get us so far. To ensure we receive robust data statewide, we need to make changes to the regulation themselves. This proved to be the right time to revisit the regulations due to another development in water rights administration, and that's the transition to a new reporting and information management platform. The board will move all of its reporting systems to Cal Waters, the name of the new platform, later this year, which will require email addresses to create secure accounts. This platform will also be able to better manage measurement data uploads and require them to be in a standard format so they can be read and interpreted correctly. In order to effectively leverage this new system, we need to make changes to our measurement and reporting regulations, and this presents an opportunity to refine the language and requirements of these sections for improved clarity and understanding. The board has drafted and released its proposed revisions, which are the subject of today's hearing. With that, we'll hear from Sierra about the content of the proposed changes.
Thanks, Pablo. My name is Sierra Kennison, and I'm a Water Resource Control Engineer with the Division of Water Rights. I will highlight the main proposed regulation changes and explain why we are proposing them. There are a few minor proposed changes that we are not discussing today for the sake of time, but we're happy to meet one-on-one to answer any questions that are not addressed in this presentation. The text of the proposed regulation is available on our rulemaking website, linked here and accessible through the QR code on this page. Along with the regulation text, you will also find a plain language summary of the changes, the notice of proposed rulemaking action, and the initial statement of reasons, which explains each and every change and includes an economic and fiscal impact analysis. With that, let's dive into it. Here's a list of the main changes we are proposing. I want to highlight that these are just proposed changes. We encourage anyone who has not yet done so to review the documentation available and to provide constructive feedback. We want to hear your thoughts and concerns to make this regulation the best it can be. We've incorporated much of what you've told us during our past outreach and previous comment periods, but if there's something that we're missing, please let us know. That said, the first and most obvious change is to the language and structure of the regulation. At first glance, it will look substantially different from the existing regulation, but the bulk of the requirements are the same. We've reorganized the text to be better organized and translated it into plainer language wherever possible, Some substantive portions of requirements have changed, which we'll be discussing today, but I want to acknowledge that when comparing the old and new versions side by side, the changes look much more intimidating than they actually are. So on to number 2. We've updated and added to the definition section to ensure that everyone is on the same page about what different terms mean. Number 3, we simplified requirements wherever we could, which in some instances resulted in reduced burden of complying with the regulation. 4, we added a requirement to explicitly identify where you are measuring. 5, we're changing the regulation to be more prescriptive about how data should be formatted and submitted. 6, we're clarifying how points of rediversion should be measured and reported. 7, updating requirements for the largest diverters. These were previously referred to as the telemetry requirements. Number 8, expanding eligibility for alternative compliance plans. 9, allowing the opportunity to adapt requirements to watershed-specific conditions. And finally, numbers 10 and 11, a couple of items that are not related to the SB 88 regulation, but will affect chapters 2 and 2.7 of the California Code of Regulations. The revised regulations will require diverters to have an email address on file with the board, and annual reports for groundwater extraction will be aligned with the water year instead of the calendar year. So to summarize the structure of the updated text, it starts with definitions to clarify key terms. In 931.5, we briefly describe the Delta Water Masters Authority. Then in the applicability section, it defines who needs to measure. This is also where we describe who is subject to the large diversion requirements, formerly known as telemetry. 933 says what you need to measure, and section 934 gets into how to measure, including things like registering your devices and completing a report of measurement methodology, explaining how you're collecting data, QA/QCing that data, apportioning that data to different water rights, or applying any conversions or calculations. After that, in 935, we talk about what you need to submit to us. So you've measured your diversion and you followed your methodology. Now you send us your data. This section talks about how to format your data and then submit it. And then in sections 936 and 937, it allows flexibility in how to measure and gives temporary exemptions in certain circumstances. 938 contains language allowing the board to adjust thresholds for different requirements based on the need for data. And lastly, as in the original text, there is a compliance section which discusses the risks of not measuring as required. Not much has changed in this section, so we won't spend much time on it today. So that's the structure of the new regulation, or the new structure of the proposed regulation. We think it lends itself to a much more logical flow and reduces some of the confusion of the existing text. Again, I want to emphasize that if you see a red-lined comparison of strikeouts and added text, it does look intimidating. Some of the existing sections have been moved around, others have been split apart and recombined. We basically crossed out the whole thing and rewrote it in plainer language. But with that, let's go through it together, section by section. Starting with definitions. So we added and refined a handful of definitions to make the overall regulation clearer. Shown here are a few examples of some select terms we want to highlight. Maximum allowable diversion amount. As the name suggests, this is the maximum amount that you are allowed to divert each year. For water right holders with licenses, permits, or registrations, this is the face value amount of your water right. It may also be expressed as a flow rate. For those who have filed a statement of water diversion and use for a pre-1914 claim, this is the initial or maximum amount diverted under that claim. And for riparian diverters, this is the maximum amount diverted or the maximum amount you intend to divert under your riparian claim. This definition does not change any requirements, but it makes it easier to refer to them without needing to repeatedly describe the individual nuances of each type of water right. Qualified individuals. These are people who are well-versed in water measurement and who can competently install devices, verify accuracy, and determine whether a measurement methodology satisfies the requirements of this regulation. Based on the feedback we've received from you all, we've expanded the eligibility for who can be qualified individuals to also include board-certified water treatment and water distribution operators, professional hydrographers, and water measurement technicians. We also updated the eligibility to include diverters who have completed the water measurement course offered by the University of California Cooperative Extension that was authorized by Assembly Bill 589. To ease the burden on smaller diverters, we revised the qualified individual definition such that people who divert 200 acre-feet per year or less do not need to meet the same eligibility restrictions. Instead, a qualified individual for smaller diversions can be anyone who is trained and experienced in water measurement and reporting. The professional qualifications only apply to those who divert more than 200 acre-feet per year. Previously, this threshold was set at 100 acre-feet per year. The next two definitions are a little bit more nuanced. So for a measuring device, under the existing regulation, you have the option to measure using either a measuring device or a measurement method. A measuring device was pretty specifically defined and could only measure one of a handful of acceptable parameters, and any other way of measuring was part of a measurement method. In practice, though, having these two terms was very confusing, and the line between what was considered a device versus a method was so blurry it didn't really offer a meaningful distinction. So now we've decided to do away with that distinction in the update. We've eliminated the term measurement method altogether, and now a measuring device is any piece of equipment that measures or that is used for measuring. Maybe it measures flow rate or volume directly, or maybe it measures elevation or electricity usage of a pump, or any other parameter that can then be used to calculate flow rate and volume. Basically, it's anything that gives a numerical output. And a measurement methodology is the overarching term for how you are doing your measuring and accounting. It includes how you used your devices to collect raw data, and then how you use that raw data output to determine each of the required measurement parameters. So this would include any quality control, any calculations or conversion, if you apportion data to multiple water rights. Basically, it's how you get from point A, your raw data, to point B, the data file that you submit to the board. For example, maybe your raw data is in units of kilowatt hours or feet of water elevation, and you need to apply a series of formulas to calculate volume and flow rate. Under the new definition, everything that helps you get to that final measurement data is considered your methodology. This includes all of your measuring devices that help you get that data, plus anything you do to transform that data. Measurement methodology is the umbrella term that encompasses it all, and the end product is your data file. So this means that diverters will generally need both a measuring device to get data and a methodology to explain how to derive the numbers in your data file. Those are the main changes to definitions. Next, we'll move on to the next section. Before I get into the changes in applicability, I want to emphasize that any exemptions described in Section 932 only apply to the measuring and reporting regulation described in Chapter 2.8. You must still adhere to all applicable requirements described elsewhere in other regulations as part of your water right terms. So here who is subject to the regulation. Compared with the existing version, no additional water right types are subject to measuring and reporting requirements. If you were not previously subject, you are not subject now either. For diverters with permits, licenses, pre-1914 statements, and riparian statements, the applicability of the regulation has not changed. It is still based on that 10 acre-foot threshold that Pablo described. The updated regulation now describes this in terms of the maximum allowable diversion amount, but it's functionally the same criteria. For registrations, though, we removed the criteria based on the size of the storage facility. It is now only based on the face value of the registration. However, since only registrations for small irrigation for non-cannabis use are even allowed to have a face value greater than 10 acre-feet per year, they are the only type of registration that is subject to this regulation. For water rights that are held by the same diverter and that share a point of diversion or a place of use or divert to the same reservoir, if the sum of the maximum allowable diversion amounts under all of those rights is greater than 10 acre-feet per year, then all of those rights are subject. This has not changed from the existing regulation, but has been reworded for clarity. The main difference between the existing regulation and this revision is that stock pond certificates and registrations for domestic use, cannabis cultivation, and livestock stock ponds are completely exempt from this regulation. None of these are allowed to have a face value greater than 10 acre-feet, and even if they share a point of diversion, place of use, or storage facility with other water rights, they do not need to be included in determining the combined maximum allowable diversion amount. For stock ponds, I do want to clarify, though, that this only applies to stock pond certificates and registrations for livestock stock ponds. These would have ID numbers starting with letters C or L. If you have a pond or reservoir under a permit or license, even if you use it as a stock pond, it may still be subject to the regulation depending on the face value. But as I mentioned, these exemptions only apply to this regulation. If you have other measuring requirements described elsewhere, like in your permit and license terms or in the cannabis policy, you must still adhere to those requirements. Qualifying reservoirs. This one is completely new. Based on the feedback we received during our outreach, some of the previous requirements for measuring releases from reservoirs were too stringent or unnecessary for small reservoirs. In response, we've introduced the concept of qualifying reservoirs. Qualifying reservoirs are those with a capacity greater than 5,000 acre-feet. Any reservoirs smaller than that are generally exempt from measuring withdrawals and releases. This way, only larger reservoirs, which usually have more sophisticated infrastructure and more complicated operations, are subject to these specific measuring requirements. Next slide, please. On to the next section. The existing regulation is not explicit enough about exactly what needs to be measured, meaning that people are measuring a whole host of different parameters. To better standardize the data we receive, we are clearly spelling out exactly what needs to be measured and recorded. This includes the date and time that you collected the measurement, and both the volume and rate of direct diversion, collection to storage, and withdrawal and release from qualifying reservoirs. That's not to say that each of these needs to be measured directly. If you have a flow meter and you know exactly when and for how long you were diverting, you can calculate the volume based on those flow measurements. Or if you use electricity consumption records along with the specifications for your specific pump, you can indirectly calculate flow and volume. Also, I want to point out that for consistency between data files, volume must be reported as discrete values diverted since the last measurement, not a cumulative running total. For rediversions, the existing regulation does not explicitly give instructions on how rediversion should be treated. Many of you are currently measuring rediversions, so thank you and please keep up the good work. For those of you who are not, if we find that rediversion data is necessary for understanding water availability, the Deputy Director may ask you to measure your rediversions. Data about rediversions is really important for helping us avoid double counting, which would otherwise make it seem like more water is leaving the stream than actually is. As we said at the beginning of this presentation, we really rely on data to make decisions about water management, so we want to make sure that that data is accurate and representative of actual conditions as possible. Next up, we have measurement locations. As in the existing regulation, you should generally be measuring close to your point of diversion. We've clarified further to say that if there are significant water losses from seepage or evaporation between the point of diversion and the measurement location, then you need to account for those as well. So for instance, you wouldn't be able to divert water into an unlined canal and then measure your diversion 3 miles down the canal, because that measurement would no longer be representative of what you actually diverted and would therefore not meet the accuracy requirements. We're also explicitly asking you to identify your measurement location. To understand water availability, we need to know when, where, and how much water is being diverted. Without specifying where measurements are being taken, we're missing that critical component of where water is being diverted, which makes it really difficult to interpret the data files we receive if we cannot link the diversion data to a physical location or point of diversion. Okay, frequency and accuracy. The most important change I want to emphasize here is that we have removed the requirement for mandatory recalibration every 5 years. After hearing from you during our outreach, we agreed it did not make sense to blanketly require recalibration. We understand it is not appropriate for many devices, some need to be recalibrated much more frequently, and some don't need to be recalibrated for decades. So that requirement has been eliminated. Beyond that, we've tried to simplify things where we could. Starting with frequency. Frequency refers to how often you need to collect data, and frequency requirements are tiered to reflect the size of diversions. As with the existing regulation, whether you measure monthly, weekly, daily, or hourly depends on the size of your diversion and whether you directly divert or divert to storage. Rights authorizing direct diversions are based on the maximum allowable diversion amount, and storage rights are based on the capacity of the reservoir. We've proposed slight changes to the tiers to align frequency requirements for storage and direct diversions. So those proposed tiers are 10 to 50 acre-feet for monthly measurements, 50 to 200 acre-feet for weekly measurements, 200 to 1,000 acre-feet for daily measurements, and greater than 1,000 acre-feet for hourly measurements. We've also simplified accuracy standards. People who installed devices before the original regulation took effect in 2016 are still grandfathered in at that same 85% accuracy requirement. For everyone else, it's based on how frequently you need to measure. So if you measure monthly or weekly, you must be at least 85% accurate, or within plus or minus 15%. If you measure daily or hourly, you must be at least 90% accurate, or within plus or minus 10%. This is generally what the existing regulation requires, but now in clearer terms. And we have removed the existing 95% accuracy requirement for laboratory certified devices altogether. Now on to Section 934, which discusses the measurement methodology. In general, the different components that need to be in your measurement methodology are pretty much the same as what was already required under the existing regulation, just put into plainer language and condensed into a single section. First, you will need to register each of your devices. This is very similar to the report of water measuring device that's required under the existing regulation. You need to register each of your devices by providing information like the make and model, where it's located, and what units the device outputs data in. Devices must be installed by a qualified individual, but we've removed much of the prescriptive requirements about testing and recalibrating devices. You will also need to complete a report of measurement methodology. To reiterate, the methodology is anything you need and anything you do to collect data and to convert it into a data file that you'll submit to the board. We are not expecting pages and pages of explanation, but we need to know generally how you're measuring and accounting. How do you take whatever the raw output of that device is and convert it into the volume and rate of direct diversion to storage, and withdrawal and release from qualifying reservoirs? What equations do you apply? How do you identify and handle data outliers? How do you account for rediversions? If your methodology covers multiple water rights, how do you apportion the data between them so that each data file only includes data for a specific water right? The form for the methodology report is based on the existing measurement method form, but we've simplified it by removing a handful of previously required fields, including additional requirements for storage rights and for groups of diverters measuring together. And lastly, we have the implementation of the methodology. The main things I want to point out here are that you do not need to wait for approval before implementing your methodology. Methodologies are subject to review and rejection, but if there is an issue, we'll contact you directly. In the meantime, each methodology is presumed to be approved unless it has been explicitly rejected. And your methodology does not expire. We just ask that you keep it up to date. So if you change something in how you're measuring and accounting, please update your methodology report accordingly. And when you implement your methodology, if you need to install or replace any equipment, you must do so in a manner and location that does not adversely affect the environment. This is implied in the existing text, but we're making it explicit in this revision that your measurement infrastructure should not result in a major disturbance to an environmental or public trust resource. And as I mentioned, the existing regulation requires you to recalibrate your devices every 5 years. Instead, we just require that you send us some kind of evidence every 5 years that your device is still functioning properly and accurately. Maybe this is still a recalibration report, or maybe it's documentation of field testing or some other means of verifying accuracy. To be clear, your device needs to meet the accuracy standards at all times, but you just need to send us verification every 5 years. And with that, I have a couple examples to go over. So I mentioned that you need to apportion data to each applicable water right. This is important because it prevents us from double counting the same water multiple times, which would make it seem like there is higher demand and less availability. So suppose you, as a single diverter, have multiple water rights that divert from the same point of diversion and you measure them jointly. Part of your methodology would explain how you determined the amount diverted under each water right. To do this, you would apportion diversions to your senior water right first, and then to your more junior water rights with any remainder. If you have diversions that could be attributable to different water rights or contracts, we understand that fully accurate apportioning at frequent time steps might not be feasible. So do the best you can and explain in your methodology what your approach is. But the most important part is that the total measurements are accurate and that you are not double counting water. Now suppose you and a group of other diverters collaborate and share devices to jointly measure your diversions. As in the previous example, you still need to apportion to each water right, but you do not need to bend over backwards to make sure every last drop is 100% accurate. The total measurement should meet the accuracy requirements, but it might not be possible to be fully accurate in your apportionment. So instead, maybe you could use a percentage-based calculation. If, say, person A and person B measure together and person A takes 3 times as much water as person B, then the methodology could say that 75% of the measured volume is attributed to person A and 25% is attributed to person B. It should note how those numbers were determined and when they might change, but the main point is that we want accurate measurements of how much water is leaving the stream, and we do not want to double count water. So please do the best you can and just tell us what you did and why. On to section 935, submitting measurement data. In the existing regulation, the language about data file content and format is very vague and just says that data needs to be viewable in Microsoft Excel. As Pablo showed earlier, that vague language has meant that there is no standardization between data files. In 2023 alone, we received data in over 1,000 different formats, which makes it virtually impossible to systematically and efficiently incorporate all of that data into a comprehensive database. Instead, we need a more standardized way of ingesting data, and that means we need to use prescriptive data templates. This regulation is not expected to become effective until later this year, so you do not need to worry about this for the current annual reporting period. But reports due January 2027 will require data file templates for your measurement data. We are also planning to allow direct transmission of data through an API or something similar, and we'll issue more guidance on that in the future. Instead of just saying, send us your data, we are clarifying that your data file should contain the volume and rate of water directly diverted, diverted to storage, withdrawn or released from qualifying reservoirs, and rediverted. And your data file needs to contain data that is specific to the water right being reported. So if a group of diverters measures together, for each measurement location, they will need to apportion the data to each water right. By now, this should all sound a bit familiar. We've talked about the parameters you need to measure, the methodology of how you measure them, and how you QA/QC, convert, and apportion that data per water right, and the final result is your data file. For the diverters who need to measure hourly, based on your feedback, we have updated the regulation to allow hourly measurements to be aggregated into daily values. To ensure sufficiently accurate, high-resolution data, you still need to measure hourly and keep records of the raw data, but we understand that quality control for hourly data sets and apportioning to different water rights on an hourly basis might not be possible, so you are permitted to aggregate them into daily values in your data file. Just be sure to explain how you're aggregating as part of your methodology. That's the bulk of what you need to know about data files. But another component that you may need to submit is supplementary information explaining your data. For most of you, this will not be required. But if, for whatever reason, you implemented a different methodology one year than the one described in your methodology report, you would need to describe it as a supplement to your data file. If you're implementing a new methodology altogether and will continue to use the new one in the future, you can just update the methodology report that you have on file. But if there's a year here and there where something is different, that's where the supplementary materials are required. Again, for most diverters, most of the time, we do not expect that they will need to submit much, if anything, in terms of supplementary materials. Okay, so over the next few slides, I'm going to go over the additional set of requirements for the largest diverters. In the existing regulation, these are referred to as telemetry requirements, but that terminology was used incorrectly and caused confusion, so we changed the name to large diversion requirements. Change in terminology aside, there are a few other changes regarding these requirements. First, for simplicity, we added the large diversion applicability to section 932, which is the applicability section, so you can see up front if it applies to you. In the revised regulation, applicability is solely based on the maximum allowable diversion amount or rate of the claimed water right. We removed the applicability conditions based on storage capacity and percentage of monthly stream flow. And if individual points of diversion divert significantly less water than others, we are explicitly encouraging alternative compliance plans to exempt individual points of diversion. Also, we are changing the 30 cubic feet per second criterion to apply to any direct diversions, not just those that happen between June and September. This change is expected to impact fewer than 200 water rates statewide, and it is intended to simplify the regulation and prevent impacts to threatened or endangered species that could occur outside of the summer timeframe. For these water rights that are newly subject to the large diversion requirements, they will have a delayed effective date for these requirements starting June of 2026. Lastly, for each point of diversion that is shared by multiple water rights held by the same owner, if the combined maximum allowable diversion amount or rate under those multiple water rights at that point of diversion is greater than 10,000 acre-feet per year or 30 cubic feet per second, then that specific point of diversion is subject to the large diversion requirements, but not the entirety of the multiple water rights. I want to emphasize that the large diversion requirements are in addition to the other requirements of the regulation that I've gone over so far. The general requirements for measuring and submitting data files still apply. That said, we've updated the text to explicitly state what needs to be measured for the large diversion requirements. Large diverters will need to measure and record the date and time of measurement, the volume and rate of diversion, and for those with qualifying reservoirs, the total volume in the reservoir at the time of measurement, and the volume and rate of withdrawal or release from the reservoir. Notably, when measuring the volume and rate of diversion, you do not need to distinguish or parse out direct diversions for diversions to storage. The combined diversion is sufficient. Next slide, please. As with the existing telemetry provision, those who are subject to the large diversion requirements must submit their data on a weekly basis. However, instead of posting it to any public website, it will be posted directly to the board's online reporting platform or any other website approved by the Deputy Director. Again, data will need to be submitted using the provided template or through direct transmission. This way, all the weekly data from all large diverters is in the same place and in the same format for improved usability. Also, the existing regulation requires that the weekly submitted data meet the overall accuracy requirements of the regulation. From our outreach, we've heard that it's often not feasible or even possible to guarantee 90% accuracy on a weekly basis. So for the purposes of the large diversions, we are updating the regulation to explicitly allow provisional data. But your final end-of-year data file for the general measuring and reporting requirements, that needs to be finalized and not provisional. You also do not need to apportion weekly submissions to each water right. Instead, just note which water rights are represented by the data. But again, the end-of-year data files will need to be apportioned to individual water rights in accordance with the general measuring and reporting requirements. Now on to Section 936, Alternative Compliance. The purpose of this section is to acknowledge that strict compliance is not always possible and that diverters may need some flexibility in how they meet the requirements of the regulation. As in the existing version, diverters are able to submit an alternative compliance plan, or ACP, that explains which requirements they cannot meet and why, and what they plan to do instead. Unlike the existing version, which has a narrow list of eligibility criteria to be allowed to pursue alternative compliance, in this update, we have opened it up to include anyone who has an effective or efficient way of measuring that meets the intent of the regulation. You will still need to justify your approach and explain how it is more effective or efficient, and explain how you meet as many of the requirements as possible, but we want to allow extra flexibility where we can. In terms of what to include in your ACP, in general, the requirements are staying pretty much the same, though we've reworded the section to be in plainer language that we hope clarifies what we need and why. We've also made clearer that diverters who pursue alternative compliance still need to submit measurement data. ACPs are intended to allow flexibility in measuring, recognizing that maybe not all requirements can be met, but they are not a way to get out of measuring altogether. And as with the methodology report, ACPs are subject to review and rejection, or we may ask for more information justifying why you need an ACP and how your proposed approach meets the intent of the regulation. But you do not need to wait for approval before implementing the ACP. It is presumed to be approved unless we tell you in writing that it is rejected. ACPs also will not expire, but you will need to review them at least once every 5 years to ensure that they are still appropriate. Temporary exemptions. This section is brand new, so let's spend a bit of time going over it. There are 4 types of temporary exemption under the proposed update. The first type is in the existing regulation already. This is the request for additional time, and it is intended for people who are awaiting grant or loan funding, permits, or other access considerations. If you need additional time to implement your methodology, you can request it through a form on the reporting platform. Please note, though, that this does not excuse you from measuring altogether. As in the existing regulation, time extensions are limited to 24 months, and during that time you must implement interim measuring and reporting practices. Next, we have temporary exemptions for people who did not divert and who did not withdraw or release water from qualifying reservoirs at all during the year. Under the proposed regulation, if you do not divert or withdraw or release any water for the entire year, you do not need to submit a data file. Instead, you will need to indicate in your annual report that you did not divert, but we do not need a data file full of zeros. And for the large diversion requirements, you do not need to post weekly data full of zeros. If you didn't divert and you didn't withdraw or release from a qualifying reservoir during the given week, you do not need to post data for that week. The next type of exemption is for people who have had their diversion infrastructure destroyed. If there's been some kind of natural disaster or some other catastrophe that wiped out your point of diversion, you can be temporarily exempt from measuring until your diversion is back up and running. Again, just indicate in your annual report when you were unable to divert and begin measuring again once diversions resume. This also applies to infrastructure for withdrawals or releases from qualifying reservoirs. If you cannot withdraw or release water, you are temporarily exempt from measuring until you are able to do so. And the last type of exemption is for people who have had their measuring devices or associated measurement infrastructure destroyed. If, say, an animal came along and stole your device, or a natural disaster broke it, you can request a temporary exemption from measuring at that location for up to 180 days, with the possibility of extending beyond that. This temporary exemption is intended to allow flexibility if you need additional time to purchase, install, or calibrate a new device. I do want to point out, though, that this type of exemption requires you to request it, whereas the previous 2, you just needed to indicate in your annual report. And lastly, before moving on, I want to emphasize that these exemptions are limited in scope. You still need to submit an annual report per Chapter 2.7 and adhere to any other requirements set forth in your permit, licenses, or other regulations, even if you have an exemption under Chapter 2.8. Okay, next let's talk about adjusting thresholds. We want to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach for all of California, and that's where the threshold adjustment comes in. It allows us the ability to tailor requirements to the needs and conditions of individual watersheds. This ability already exists in the existing regulation, but we've refined it and streamlined it in this update. As in the existing version, the board can raise the 10 acre-foot general applicability threshold for the regulation after conducting an analysis. And for adjusting the large diversion applicability thresholds, previously this was done by adjusting the stream flow percentage threshold for telemetry. Now we're proposing to instead adjust large diversion applicability by using a similar analysis as for the general applicability threshold. We've also added opportunities to adjust thresholds determining measurement frequencies for how often you need to collect measurements, and thresholds determining which reservoirs are considered qualifying reservoirs. So if we find that requirements are too stringent in a given watershed, we could raise the thresholds so that fewer people would be held to the more stringent requirements. Additionally, in the existing regulation, the board has the ability to ask for data files at any time, though typically we just ask for them at the end of the year with your annual report. In this update, we streamlined this process by creating a schedule that can be updated as needed. So if we know that we will end up needing data more frequently than once per year, we could update the reporting schedule to say, hey, we actually need data every quarter or every month, instead of repeatedly issuing requests each quarter or each month. Again, this is not a new authority, but it should make the process clearer. And if the board asks for data more frequently than just once a year, we may accept provisional data in those cases. I want to try to alleviate any concern about the threshold adjustment section. The intent is to better align the cost and effort of measuring with the importance of those measurements. So if we enter a drought scenario where highly accurate measurement data becomes more valuable, then we might lower the thresholds to increase the availability of that data, though no water rights under 10 acre-feet per year will be affected. But in less severe times, we could raise the thresholds to make things easier. Either way, it will be accompanied by a thorough analysis, and there will be a noticed opportunity for comment before we adjust any thresholds. Okay, that concludes the main changes to Chapter 2.8, which is the SB 88 Measuring and Reporting Regulation. Next, there are a couple of other minor water rights related regulation changes that we're proposing as part of this update. These affect Chapters 2 and 2.7 of the California Code of Regulations, Title 23. First, we're requiring that each water right holder have a valid email address on file with the board. This requirement could also be met by an agent or employee of the water right holder. We're modernizing our online reporting system, and the new platform requires an email address for data security purposes, so we're updating the regulation to include this requirement. And lastly, in Section 930 of Chapter 2.7, which talks about groundwater notices of extraction and diversion, we are changing the reporting timeline to align with the water year instead of the calendar year. All other annual reports were transitioned to be based on the water year a few years ago, and now we're making that transition for groundwater notices of extraction and diversion as well. As a reminder, a water year is the 12-month period starting October 1st and ending September 30th. So water year 2025 started October 1st, 2024, and it will end September 30th of this year. Next slide, please. That concludes the overview of the revised regulations and all proposed changes. I want to briefly touch on the proposed implementation for when each requirement takes effect. It is currently April of 2025. We plan for the measuring requirements of the updated regulation to go into effect October 1st of this year, which is the start of water year 2026. This means that starting in October, diverters will need to start measuring in accordance with the updated regulation. This is primarily what's discussed in Section 933. Those of you who are currently subject to the telemetry regulations or telemetry requirements, at that time you will also need to adhere to the large diversion requirements of the updated regulation. We are currently in water year 2025. Annual reports for data collected this water year are due on or before January 31st, 2026. As I mentioned earlier, your data files for water year 2025 do not need to meet the updated requirements, but instead must meet the existing requirements. In other words, for water year 2025, you can continue to submit data files as normal. However, you must register your measuring devices and provide an email address in accordance with the updated version by the reporting deadline. And the update to groundwater recordation reporting, that will apply to the water year 2025 reports due at the end of January 2026. Large diverters who are not currently subject to telemetry requirements will need to comply with the large diversion requirements of the updated regulation by June of 2026. About 8 months after the regulation goes into effect. And the remaining reporting requirements take effect by reporting deadline for water year 2026. So that would be on or before January 31st, 2027. You'll need at that point to begin submitting data files using the provided templates, including supplementary materials as needed. You will also need to submit your report of measurement methodology or file your alternative compliance plan by the state. Please note that in the proposed draft that was released in February of this year, we had listed the dates for the measurement methodology report and the alternative compliance plans as being January 2026. But based on comments we've already received, we're already planning to push that date back to January 2027. So there's a bit more time to get your forms completed in the new system. I know that was a lot of information to get through. Thank you for your patience and attention. We will now have a 15-minute break before the public comments. Please return at 11:06 a.m. You must be on Zoom to make an oral comment at today's hearing. If you're not on Zoom and would like to speak and make a public comment, please register using the QR code shown. If you have any issues with joining the meeting, please email us at dwr-measurement@waterboards.ca.gov.
Welcome back, everyone. Our 15-minute break is now over and we'll resume the hearing at this point. Now we will hear the public comments about the proposed regulation revisions. As a reminder, the purpose of this hearing is to obtain public comments about the board's proposed regulation revisions. Staff will not respond to comments at this hearing or engage in a discussion about the regulations. If you would like to discuss the regulations with staff outside of this hearing, our contact information will be included at the end of the presentation. We may answer short clarifying questions during the hearing, but we highly encourage you to send any questions specific to your individual situation or longer questions as an email so that we can provide you with a thorough and thoughtful response. The oral comments provided now will be recorded and documented. We will provide a written response to all comments in the final statement of reasons, which will be emailed to all commenters and interested parties. The final statement of reasons is a public regulatory document that will be part of the final regulatory package submitted to the Office of Administrative Law. Before we begin, I'll run through a few quick logistics. Commenters will be called on in the order that they registered, and the order will be listed on the next slide so that you know who's up next. Please listen for your name and raise your hand in Zoom, and you will be asked to unmute and provide your comment. After everyone who has registered to speak has had the opportunity to comment, I will ask any other attendees who would like to provide a comment to use the raise hand feature at that time, and I will call on people one by one. We ask that attendees listen actively with an open mind and respect others' viewpoints, even if you don't agree with them. Last, we kindly ask speakers to limit your comments to 5 minutes out of respect for others who also wish to speak. Let's make sure everybody has the opportunity to be heard today. After 45 minutes of public comments, we'll take a short 5-minute break, and then we'll resume the public comments again. Now we will begin hearing from individuals who requested to speak when they registered for this hearing. When I call your name, please click the raise hand icon in Zoom. If you do not respond after your name is called, we will move on to the next registered speaker. If you missed your first opportunity to speak, we will call those attendees again after we have gone through the speaker list. Any attendees that did not previously register to speak will be allowed to comment afterwards. We ask commenters to state your name, speak clearly, and limit your comment to 5 minutes. A court reporter is present and will be documenting your comment. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted online after the hearing concludes. First up, we have Drew Boochley. Please click the raise hand function so that our team can find you in the list of participants and unmute yourself when that option appears on your screen. It looks like our first speaker is not present in the Zoom meeting at this time. So we'll move on to our second speaker and we'll return at the end. Our second speaker is Laura Bradford. Please raise your hand in Zoom and our team will unmute you. Okay, it looks like our second speaker is also not present. Although if it looks like we do have some folks on the phone. So if you are the first or second speaker on this list and you're calling in from a phone number, press *9 to raise your hand and we can unmute you that way. So I'll wait a second to see if either of those speakers are present on the phone at this time. Okay, I don't see any hands raised right now. So we'll move on to our third registered speaker, which is Stephen Haugen.
Yeah, this is Steve Haugen. I do not have any comments at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, our fourth commenter, Bruce Russell, please raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment at this time.
Hello?
Hi there,
Can you
Mr.
hear me?
Russell, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me? This is Bruce Russell.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
I just had a question. I don't know if I want to wait till the end for you to give this information, but I think I would like to submit an alternative compliance plan. And I just wonder, where do I go to do that?
Thank you for that question. I believe that that will be an option through the new Cal Water system, but we don't know how that will point. If anybody on my team wants to add any more additional information, feel free, but that's my understanding.
Yes, that will be through the Cal Water's online reporting platform, but we don't have any specifics on how that will operate. So we suggest you sign up for the Upward Cal Water's email subscription list, and that will help you keep up to date.
Is there an email you can give me that's a contact email or contact place?
Yes, that's the email that's at the bottom of this slide here, dwr-measurement@waterboards.ca.gov. We always have somebody monitoring that inbox and can get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is Cole Johnson. Please raise your hand and we'll be able to unmute you.
Hello.
Hi there, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, good. This is really general. I've had my water rights since 1998, and it started out that we just filed a paper report every year. There was no fee, no nothing, and there was no measurement required. And it's steadily, gotten, more expensive, of course, and the requirements more stringent. And I've tried to keep up, but I'll just tell you, for what you're implementing right now, the water boards need to have enough qualified people to answer all the questions you're going to get. And just running it through AI or whatever you're going to do is not going to make it happen. And I've had so much trouble trying to find someone at the water boards to answer my questions that actually knows anything. And, if we're going to step up our game, you guys need to step up your game and be able to provide us the information that we need when we need it. We're not like you. We're not professional, people working at the water boards. We have jobs. We have other things that we do, and we don't know all this stuff. And from what I can tell, you guys don't really know how it's all going to work yet. And that's my comment.
Thank you very much for that comment, Mr. Johnson. Okay, our next speaker is Scott Newman. Please raise your hand on Zoom. Right, it doesn't look like Mr. Newman is present in the Zoom room. We'll return to him at the end of the presentation. But next, let's move on to Patricia Chelseth. Please raise your hand if you're present and would like to make a comment. Okay, I don't see that speaker present in the Zoom room, so we'll move on to Kathy Monroe. Please raise your hand in Zoom if you're present and would like to make a comment. Okay, it doesn't look like Kathy Monroe is present, so we'll keep moving on then. And just a reminder for folks that are on the phone, if I call your name and you'd like to raise your hand, make sure that you press *9 on your keyboard so that your hand will be raised from the phone. And just a reminder as well, if you're hearing me call your name and you're watching on our webcast but not from the Zoom, make sure that you join the Zoom webcast via the link that was sent to you in the email. The Zoom meeting is where you would be able to make a comment. The webcast is where you're able to just watch and listen if you'd like. Okay, our next speaker is Chris Kahn. Please raise your hand if you're present and would like to make a comment. Okay, I don't see that speaker here. We'll keep on moving. Our next speaker is Noah Lopez. Please raise your hand if you would like to make a comment at this time. And if you are on your phone, please press *9.
Lopez.
Hi there, we can hear you, thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, I think my preliminary questions were answered in the presentation. So I do have one note, just the set of regulations has changed and evolved since its original passage in 2016. And so I appreciate the board's effort to kind of implement these new changes with a buffer period. But I would just say also, or encourage flexibility in enforcement. I note the change recently this year of adding automatic penalties to water rights fees for those not complying with this set of regulations. And I might suggest some sort of reconsideration of that for at least a short period while these new changes are implemented. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Lopez. I see we have a hand raised from Eric Echtel. Our team could unmute him.
Hi, thank you. This is Eric Echtel. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights. I did want to jump in real quickly on the last comment and note two things. First off, we do not have any late fees associated with SB 88. And at this time, we do not have any anticipated. The late fees are for your annual water use reporting, which has been in place for a couple of decades. And it does illustrate the level of confusion, I think, and the difficulty in trying to message around the difference between your annual reports and your metering and measurement or SB 88 reporting. And so that's something that we're going to try and do really carefully as we go forward. But again, there are no late fees for SB 88, the metering and measurement component at this time. So I just wanted to highlight that, and that's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eric. And thank you, Mr. Lopez, for your comment. All right, next we'll move on to Timothy Waziewski. If you're present in the Zoom room, please raise your hand and we'll get you unmuted.
Hi, thanks. No comments today.
All right, thank you very much. Next up, we have Lee Hodge. Please raise your hand if you're present and would like to make a comment. Not seeing you present in the Zoom room, so we'll come back at the end of the presentation. Again, if you are watching on the webcast, but you would like to make a comment, make sure to join via Zoom. And also, if you have signed up to make a comment but aren't able to attend and comment today, we're still accepting written public comments, and so you can send those to the email inbox that's shown at the bottom of this slide. Okay, next up we have Kent Morgan. Please raise your hand if you're present and would like to make a comment. Okay, not seeing Kent Morgan. So next up we have Michael Walters. Please raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. Okay. Next we have Timothy Louie. Please click raise hand in Zoom if you'd like to make your comment today. Okay. I do see one hand raised. Let me double check. Yeah, if our team could unmute Mr. Louie. Mr. Louie, we've asked you to unmute on here, and I think you have to accept that and unmute on your end as well.
Did that do it?
That did. Thank you very much.
I don't have any comment at this time yet. I want to see what your process will be at the end to talk to individuals.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have specific individual questions, I'd also encourage you to write us an email to the email listed at the bottom of the screen. If you don't want to wait on the call, we're happy to follow up over the phone or email on individual questions as well. So that's another option. All right, next we'll move on to Mike Matlock.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I guess I'm one to speak up since we're getting a lot of no-shows here so far. Hey, my name is Mike Matlock. I'm a property owner on the Mill Creek, Little Case Creek tributary in Northern California, and I happen to live in an unincorporated area of Northern California, and I've had a water right since 1964. And I filed a complaint a little over 3.5 years ago, July of 2021, and that complaint number is 51304. And I have no idea if the process of the investigations is continuing or if the investigations are being addressed. My complaint has been very valid concerns, reasons to help restore and protect the anadromous stream in which natural spring water flows are being diverted. These diversions are impacting my senior water rights and public trust resources such as fisheries and riparian habitat. There have been multiple contacts with the State Water Resource Control Board to look out for the needs of the Mill Creek Little Case tributary and the nearby in-streams, and yet communication is very evident of being one-sided. I want to thank you, though, here for today for reevaluating the water diversion methods and regulations, and hopefully we all can grow from what we're trying to improve on in our water systems here in this state. We know, or I would like to share, that the water flow of the Mill Creek Little Case tributary are dependent on nearby creeks, many natural springs, surface waters that are on properties upstream from my property. When natural surface water flows are disturbed and are blocked by man-made earth dams, improper reporting by property owners with water rights, State Water Board authorizing and allowing excessive water diversion, industrial agricultural farming taking place, etc. Over a long period of time, this causes a significant reduction in natural water flow, which leads to many factors, such as affects the ecology of the stream, causes a reduction in habitat availability, food production, and water quality, affects the physical attributes of the stream, creating harmful impacts on the endangered fish species, such as the Chinook salmon and coho salmon. And in addition, these actions that I've already shared are occurring and causing injury harm to me and other legal water users. Furthermore, my complaint, number 51304, has led to the first protest of a stock pond application in the history of the state of California. These issues that have been shared with the water issues have been shared since 1979, when my father informed the State Water Board with letters and water usage reports. From my father's communication and mine as well with the State Water Board, our name has been entered into the State Water Board records to receive a notice of all applications in the Mill Creek watershed, so that we may submit a protest against any application which we believe would be either interfere with our vested rights or would have significant adverse environmental effects. To my knowledge, being informed by the State Water Board of new applications in the watershed has not happened. These issues continue and are of much concern, and I look forward to the efforts to restore the natural water flow of Mill Creek Little Case Creek tributary. Look forward to these concerns being resolved. And yes, I do have some questions. I did submit some to the Division of Water Rights. And some of those questions could be, how is the diversion of water by a self-reporting property owner monitored during the summer months? Another question, when a self-reporting property owner completes an annual water report, is that report ever audited? Third question, are there current consequences when a self-reporting property owner falsely reports water usage on their annual water report? And my last question here is, do 50-plus-year-old water rights owned by property owners that have been approved by the Division of Water Rights, are they adjusted or regulated for the needs of other property owners that might live downstream? Those are some of my thoughts here on the day after tax day. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Matlock. Okay, next up we have Stephanie Rodden. Please raise your hand in Zoom and we'll allow you to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. My name is Stephanie Rodden, and I'm a ranch owner of 4 small capacity stock ponds. And it seems to me that under this new plan, in order to comply, it is necessary to hire a qualified contractor to install electronic measuring and reporting devices. I wanted to know what other, and 2 of them are under 8 acre feet. I've been in, my family has been in the business, and we've had the stock ponds since the 1950s. What other options are available to me besides hiring someone to install 4 expensive electronic devices for measuring, especially when they're under 10 acre feet? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, Ms. Rodden. We've noted that, and then I would also recommend that you email us if you'd like a specific follow-up on your question. We can discuss more specifically about your individual case if you'd like. And then as well, I just wanted to clarify in case there's confusion from folks that this regulation does not apply to anybody using less than 10 acre feet. So if anyone from my team wants to come on and discuss that more, happy to, or we can move along with the presentation. All right, we'll keep moving along. Oh, and just to clarify that that's folks who are authorized to use less than 10 acre feet are not required, are not subject to this regulation. But yes, please feel free to email us if you have more specific questions. Next up, we have Stephen Peng. Please raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute in Zoom.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. My name is Stephen Peng. I'm a state relations advocate for the Association of California Water Agencies. ACWA represents more than 470 public water providers that collectively deliver approximately 90% of the water in California for domestic, agricultural, and industrial uses. I wanted to first thank the board for this public hearing and the opportunity to provide public comments today. I'd also like to thank board staff for all the work they've put into this. I know it's been an enormous lift to get us here where we are today. We really appreciate the State Water Board's engagement during the pre-rulemaking process. However, we do have some concerns with the current draft of the regulations. First, we'd recommend that the State Water Board include clear and more precise language for both the measuring and reporting requirements. While we may agree with the intent behind certain provisions, the current draft leaves too much room for varying interpretations. Our comment letter is going to go into more details, but just a few quick examples. It's unclear whether diverters are required to submit raw instrument data or processed and interpreted data. Similarly, what level of QA/QC is required for data submissions. Regarding the weekly submission requirements, it's my understanding that for that reporting, diverters aren't required to apportion diversions by type, whether that's direct diversions or diversions to storage, and aren't required to apportion by water right. Sierra mentioned this during the presentation this morning, so thanks for flagging that, Sierra. But as currently written, that's not clear in the regulations, and we'd recommend that the State Water Board add some additional language for clarity. Also related to the weekly submission requirements, the revised regulations aren't clear about the specific time frame that each submission is intended to cover. So say a diverter is submitting their report on Friday. Should they be submitting data for that week? Should they be submitting data for the week prior or 2 weeks ago? We need additional clarity of when data should be reported and which period it should reflect. On that note, we'd also recommend including a lag time between the measurement and reporting periods for weekly submissions. Some of the data subject to these requirements is associated with critical infrastructure in the energy grid, and real-time publication or near real-time publication of this data could potentially present some security risks. As far as process, the revised regulations don't establish an appropriate procedure for diverters to respond to requests for additional information about their measurement methodologies, or when the State Water Board determines that a methodology must be rejected. Similarly, there isn't an established timeline for notifying applicants when an ACP or alternative compliance plan has been rejected. These are just a few examples. Like I said, we'll go into more detail in our letter, but we believe it's really, really important to make sure the regulations are clear and consistent, especially when there's a potential for changes in interpretation over time. Second, we'd recommend that the State Water Board revise the weekly submission requirements to make them feasible for large diverters. The proposed approach doesn't align with how diversions to storage are defined or measured according to existing regulations. Under sections 657 and 658 of the State Water Board's regulations, water is not considered stored until it has remained in a reservoir for at least 30 days. Any attempt to estimate storage on a shorter time frame, such as weekly, would be speculative rather than the actual storage according to the law. So we'd recommend that the State Water Board alter the weekly submission requirements to make them feasible for large diverters, whether that's requiring diverters to submit data on a monthly basis instead of weekly, or if you want to maintain that weekly time step, requesting that diverters submit weekly data on reservoir inflows and outflows instead of diversions to storage. Something needs to be revised so that the regulations align with the operational and legal realities of storage. My understanding is that the purpose of the weekly submission requirements is to provide the board with just a general sense of how water is moving through the system. There are alternatives or options that would do that without imposing unworkable or inaccurate reporting burdens on diverters. And then finally, we recommend the State Water Board coordinate and collaborate with the Upward Advisory Group and public water suppliers. These individuals and agencies are deeply, deeply familiar with their watersheds and well-positioned to be key partners when developing technically sound, cost-effective, and practical approaches to water rights data collection. So I'll end there. Again, thanks so much for providing interested parties with the opportunity to provide comment, and I really appreciate all of the effort that's gone into this so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Pang, and we'll look for that comment letter to come through. It's always helpful to see specific language changes and suggestions. So thank you very much for that. All right, our next commenter is Joseph Gallegos. Please raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute.
No comment at this time. Thank you, though.
Thank you very much. All right, next we have Matt Nunez. If you're present on the call, please raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute. If you've called in, please press *9 and you can raise your hand that way. Okay, not seeing anything. Next up, we have a potential panel from Kyle Knutson, Ann Williams, Darren Cordova, and David Guy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Just myself today, Kyle Knutson with MBK Engineers. So thank you for the opportunity to share these comments as well as submit written comments. We appreciate the time and effort that division staff have invested gathering feedback from the community over the last couple of years regarding these regulations, including incorporating what we believe are some positive proposed changes based on that feedback. So now a couple comments that we will be including along with a few others in our written comments. In 934C, as previously noted in our prior comment letter, water users need time following the adoption of any changes to the regulation. In addition, water users need sufficient time to prepare the significant new documentation required by the regulation for a report of measurement methodology. It's unlikely that this report can be accomplished by many water users prior to the deadline currently identified as January 31, 2026. Therefore, we appreciate the division's acknowledgement during their presentation that this will be changed from the current version to January 31st, 2027. Similarly, for ACPs, we appreciate the acknowledgement of ACPs submitted prior to October 1st, 2025. However, for similar reasons to those identified in the prior comment, we recommend that this deadline be January 31, 2027 as well, which I believe I heard the division say during their presentation. And then lastly, in regards to submitting measurement data in section 935E3, the current telemetry requirement, as you know, is daily data posted weekly on a public website. Our understanding was that initially the state board was going to develop a website where this data could be posted. However, that did not occur. Therefore, since the time the telemetry requirement went into effect, water users have invested significant time and expense developing their own public websites to meet this requirement. Therefore, we recommend that the proposed section acknowledge these efforts by stating something along the lines of publicly accessible websites hosting this data prior to October 1st, 2025 are approved unless otherwise notified by the Deputy Director. With that, that's our final comments. Once again, we appreciate and encourage the continued coordination. We look forward to working with division staff through the refinements to the proposed changes, their interaction on the new reporting platform, and implementation of the regulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Knudsen. Next up, we have Nicholas Bonsignor. Please raise your hand in Zoom and we'll allow you to unmute that way.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Nick Bonsignor with Wagner and Bonsignor Engineers. We represent a large number of diverters and do quite a few annual reports every year. And we submitted comments on the prior draft of the regulations. And we noted that many of the changes we requested were implemented in the new draft. So we're very appreciative of that. In particular, we represent a great number of small diverters, and many of our comments had to do with that. And they were. It sounds like you heard us, so thank you. And we will be submitting a few more written comments here before the deadline. I guess one thing we're going to want to know, I don't know if anyone can answer it today. I realize it's not a discussion forum, but we're very curious about the format of the report of measurement methodology and what exactly that is going to be, whether it's going to be some type of a form or whether it's going to be some type of a free format or what. Our concern is that we use methodologies to prepare the reports now, but how those get disclosed in the actual report is we're a little curious about, and what that's going to take for, again, the great number of annual reports that we help our clients with every year. It does help that, based on what Sierra said, that the report of measurement methodology deadline has been extended to 2027. That was something we requested, and it's good to hear it in this meeting that you're changing that. So anyway, that's our concern. We're going to be very interested in what's involved, what's going to be required for the report of measurement methodology, and kind of related also the data template. In fact, it would be, and maybe the template will be the same as what the board has prepared previously as an option, but for both of those, it would be helpful to see in advance what format those things take before the new reporting form goes final. So thank you again. Thanks for making the changes. Thanks for hosting this follow-up meeting. And we will be submitting more comments before the deadline.
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Bonsignor, and for your continued involvement in this process. Very helpful. All right, we'll move on to our next speaker, which is Amy Raymond. Please raise your hand if you're in the Zoom room and would like to talk. And if you're calling in, please press *9 on your phone to raise your hand that way. Okay, don't see any hand raised, so we'll move on to Roger Herring. Please raise your hand if you're in the Zoom room and ready to make your comment. Okay, I don't see a hand raised yet. So we'll move on to our 25th commenter, Manny Bahia. Please raise your hand in the Zoom room and we'll allow you to unmute so you can make your comment.
I am Manny Bahia with the State Water Contractors. We represent 27 of the 29 long-term state water project contract holders who collectively deliver water to 27 million Californians and to 750,000 acres of prime farmland. We appreciate the opportunity to provide comment today and all the work that the board's been doing on this topic. We also appreciate the need for accurate measurement of water diversions and emphasize that this is critical for water rights enforcement, especially during drier conditions. Recent stream depletions have been much higher than historical depletions. Depletions in the Delta have been estimated to be 1.5 million to 2 million acre feet. Without accurate measurements of diversions and reporting, it is impossible to determine if the depletions are a result of natural processes or diversions, including illegal diversions. OpenET is going to be useful for understanding consumptive use, but it can't be a surrogate for reporting requirements for water right enforcement. Significant effort is needed to translate OpenET crop evapotranspiration data to diversion data that would meet the intent and requirements of SB 88, so it could be useful for water right enforcement. As the State Water Board considers updates to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, which includes significant commitments of water to the environment, it's important that the exact timing and magnitude of diversions are measured to ensure accurate and legal administration of water rights. We recognize that this is challenging, but it's important to have the same quality of diversion information for all the diverters and not just the State Water Project and the CVP diversions. To be consistent with SB 88 and the APA, the ACP should closely track to existing regulations and require substantial evidence and approval that the modifications to measurement requirements are warranted. We understand and appreciate the Water Board's intent to increase and improve reporting by water right holders and under SB 88. While we support this intent, the proposed modifications do not allow the Water Board to achieve dynamic real-time management of water rights in the Delta watershed and would undermine efforts to protect environmental water. We request that the Water Board consider our comments and undo or modify proposed changes to that deviate from the intent of SB 88. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next up, we have Patrick New. Please raise your hand in Zoom and we'll allow you to unmute. I see Patrick's name in our Zoom meeting, but Patrick, if you're speaking, we're not hearing you right now. So we'll come back around to you and the rest of the folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet at the end of the meeting. Next up, we have Jean-Paul Magradishin. So please raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. My name is Jean-Paul Mogradichin. I'm the Business Development and Sales Manager at Seton Farms of Terabella. We are a grower, packer, exporter of pistachios. Thank you very much for giving us the time and the space to do public comment today. And to reiterate the previous comments of gratitude for the immense amount of undertaking and effort that you guys put into this, we really appreciate it. First, we support aligning the reporting period in Section 930. Secondly, we strongly support expanding the requirements in Section 913 to include a formal online account registration process, which I think you mentioned, including an API key access, which I believe you also mentioned is coming soon. This is crucial for ensuring accountability and traceability of all report submittals, and it also provides essential protection against cyber attacks, which is increasingly important in our digital age, which I heard somebody else mention just a few moments ago. Furthermore, we advocate for revising the Code of Regulations to support programmatic access to the board's online reporting platform through a public API, which I believe you mentioned. And we recommend the development of a standardized electronic water rights transmission specification that encompasses all fields currently available in ERIMS, along with new fields to enhance the usefulness of the platform for regulators, diverters, and the general public. We will be submitting a long format letter with more detail on our suggested enhancements and technical recommendations. Additionally, as part of this technical improvement, standardization of things like units, including volumetric flow units like CFS versus acre feet, I believe is essential. We also suggest requiring the reporting of APNs and shapefiles of land serviced by any diversion point, the ability to report data errors programmatically so they can be reviewed in a timely and efficient manner. We'd like to see mechanisms for large format data consumption, detailed audit logging, and including the exact date of judgments or decrees for the newly digitized records, as well as the maximum allowable diversion amount, because I believe a lot of that information is currently stored in PDFs that are very poorly legible when looking through the ERIMS data. We also support revising the telemetry requirements in sections 931 through 938 to require large diverters meeting specific criteria to post their measurement data directly via the new API daily, eliminating the cumbersome, error-prone, and costly exercise of manual data file submission with the new template. We strongly support telemetry reporting applying to all diverters engaged in commercial activities, as well as standardizing measurement methodology, and all of these things in efforts of really achieving long-term sustainable water management throughout the state. Lastly, we're in support of improving clarity and consistency in board regulations and promoting adaptability in board administration. Thank you all for your time and consideration of these important matters. I do have a few questions specifically around the API. You did mention that more information is coming soon. It would be great to know when that information is coming and if there's going to be any sort of technical working group that's going to be put together for that. If so, we would absolutely love to be a part of that. We have an in-house R&D team, including software engineers, and would love to be part of that public process in terms of defining the data standard, making sure that it is considering the needs of all types of users and reporters, as well as the public, as well as researchers and anyone else interested in the water data. Thank you again very much for your time and consideration of these matters. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comment. Okay, next up we have David Webb. Please raise your hand in the Zoom meeting and we'll allow you to unmute.
Thank you. I've got just limited comments right now. I'll submit some written comments as soon as I can. In the course of this entire presentation, I saw no mention or heard no mention of water mastered streams and water masters reports. By my rough count, there are at least 29 surface streams water mastered by local water masters who have entirely different reporting requirements that are vastly inferior as it stands right now to the old reporting requirements, and that there's really no excuse for a professional water master not to be able to report in greater detail and with more accuracy that is done by an amateur water user. So all of these changes you're proposing are appropriate. Undoubtedly, there's always going to be room for improvement, but they should apply equally to both individual reports and to water master reports, so that those streams with water masters are those streams which have gone through a court adjudication process, which means they are those streams where water is in shortest supply and is most contentious, really ought to have the best data available and not the worst. And right now, the water masters reports are inferior to what an individual puts out. The water masters reports also should be entirely supportive, as should individual reports, of the SGMA process, which means greater specificity in terms of point of diversion and place of use, and quantity of diversion on a narrower time scale than monthly. The modeling required to comply with SGMA, particularly in the more complicated basins, really requires far better data accessibility than is currently possible, and vastly more than what the water masters report. I think that's all I would say for now. I think it would be good if assistance could be given to individuals in the form of GIS handholding, so that their points of diversion could be specified without having them to go learn a whole new software system. And other than that, thank you very much, and I will submit written comments.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Webb. Next up, we have Megan Murphy. Please raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll allow you to unmute.
Good morning, State Water Board members and staff. I'm Megan Murphy, Senior Regulatory Advocate with the California Municipal Utilities Association, known as CMUA. CMUA represents 84 publicly owned electric, gas, water, and wastewater utilities statewide, and together our members provide water service to 75% of Californians and electric service to 25% of the state. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Our first comment is related to the data frequency. In many cases, hourly and weekly data is not technically feasible, especially as it relates to water storage. So if more frequent data is deemed necessary, we recommend that the division consider a monthly measurement to be submitted on a monthly reporting schedule. This monthly submission would align with the 30-day residence time used as a threshold between flow regulations and storage, as outlined in Title 13 of the Water Code, Sections 657 and 658. The second comment is related to real-time reporting. If weekly data reporting is required or at a daily time scale, the regulation should allow for a lag time in real-time reporting. Reporting large diversions in near real time on a publicly accessible platform could pose significant security risks, particularly regarding physical security. And safeguarding public water and power infrastructure from potential threats is in the state's best interest to ensure both domestic and international security. Additionally, it may unintentionally affect energy trading markets. The third comment we have is related to the alternative compliance plans. We recommend that the ACPs include more robust oversight by the state with a clearly defined time frame, such as 30 days from the date of submission, and that the State Water Board should be required to evaluate each ACP for eligibility and accuracy using transparent criteria. And finally, we understand from conversations with staff that new requirements will not be required for the water year 2025 report submitted in 2026, but this needs to be explicitly stated in the regulation to avoid confusion. It's extremely challenging to comment on regulation without seeing the Cal Water's platform or the submission requirements, so we request that the division engage with data providers prior, during, and after the rollout of the new Cal Water system, and that any mandating reported system should be after the system has been in place and water systems have an opportunity to get accustomed to the new system. That could include some beta testing prior to the regulation going into effect. CMUA will be expanding upon these comments in the form of a letter to the board. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Murphy, for your comments, and we look forward to receiving all public written comments after this presentation as well. All right, next up we have Dan Nomalini Jr. Please raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
My name's Dan Nomalini Jr. I'm an attorney with the Central Delta Water Agency. I wanted to make a quick technical comment, but in response to the state water contractors, they were talking about the Delta Alternative Compliance Plan. Just wanted to remind everybody the Delta is extremely unique. It's a tidal estuary where water literally sloshes back and forth, huge amount of water, twice every 25 hours. And in the Delta, water is constantly pumped from the islands back into the river. And for almost all the islands, the levees, they're made of dirt. So the river water seeps through that dirt and enters the island. And that water is used for farming. So there's not, the water that enters the islands is not limited to the pumps or siphons or floodgates. There's constant water flowing through the levee itself. So the focus on consumptive use makes the most sense. And the Delta Alternative Compliance Plan and your regulations allow for adapting to what makes the most sense. So in the Delta, whatever water enters the island, either seepage or through a pump, whatever water enters that's not consumed or evaporated gets pumped back into the Delta, into this pool that sloshes back and forth. So the best way to measure what's being lost from that pool is to look at the consumptive use. Your regulations previously accommodated this, your current ones do as well. So I hope you don't do anything to unravel that, because this is truly the best way to measure water use in the Delta. But my technical point, really quick, this has concerned me for over 10 years and I just dealt with it. I thought you were going to fix this, but you didn't, so I'm just going to bring it up. The statutes, Water Code 1840 and Water Code 5103, they both say that somebody that diverts 10 acre-feet of water per year or more shall employ or install a measuring device or do some kind of measurement. So it's 10 feet of water per year or more. Now, the regulations don't say that. They say greater than 10 acre-feet. Super minor point, but this comes up every time I advise somebody and say, look, you don't have to deal with the measurements. I tell them if you're less than 10 acre-feet, because that's what the statute says. If you're less than 10, then you don't have to comply. But your regulations are different. And so I'd like you, I think, just to acknowledge that your regulations in section 932 says the regulations don't apply if you're greater than 10 acre-feet. Well, they should say if you're 10 acre-feet or more. So you do have the authority to modify this threshold. Like I said, it comes up when I have to advise somebody what's the rule. I always look to the statute, but you do have authority to change the statute in this regard. So I would ask that you acknowledge this somewhere. I haven't seen an acknowledgement that you are deviating from the legislature's specification. So I've always thought maybe it's a typo, maybe you're overlooking that. So I just call that to your attention. If you're intentionally going against the statute, I'm fine with that. Just acknowledge that somewhere, that you're doing it so people like me who nerd out on this kind of stuff aren't thinking it's a typo. So that's all my comments. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comment. All right, next we'll move on to Austin Verissimo. I see you have your hand raised. We'll allow you to unmute and then you can begin your comment.
Hi, yes, my name is Austin Verissimo. Most of my comments were actually touched upon in earlier comments. So I just wanted to stress the importance of the data in the platform being able to be analyzed and exported in an easy fashion. But other than that, everything else was touched upon. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, and last on this list is Ryan Becerra.
Hi, this is Ryan Becerra. Thank you. BKS Law Firm. We represent a number of entities that have what would now be called large reservoirs. And I want to talk about how the regulations treat storage. Ms. Murphy from CMUA just mentioned this a couple minutes ago, but these regulations assume that it is possible to measure the accumulation of storage on a real-time basis. And that just isn't the case. It's striking. We've made these comments a number of times, but under the board's own regulations, water is not accumulated to storage under sections 657 and 658 unless it's been there at least 30 days. And yet over and over, these regulations say, we want you measuring your accumulation to storage. In fact, 933H3A appears to say that not only do you have to measure accumulation to storage in real time, you have to break it out by the water right in real time. As far as I know, in my years of working with reservoir operators, these things are just not possible. Reservoir accumulates in storage as a difference between inflows and outflows. And moreover, many of the reservoirs in this state are not only water supply reservoirs, but also flood control. And so in the wintertime, when you have a rising storage level, that may be simply for flood control that is not intended to be used for water right purposes. Yet, as I read these regulations, they would seem to say you have to be reporting your accumulation of water merely for flood control. It's very concerning, fundamentally because, I mean, regulations should reflect how reservoirs operate, and these simply don't. So I think the water board needs to think pretty hard about the way these regulations are talking about the reporting of reservoir storage, just so they can ensure that they match the way reservoirs operate. We've made these comments before. Hopefully, these things will be corrected in the next version. So that's my primary comment. My second comment has to do with one of the specific definitions, 931O, point of diversion. So that is a critical definition because, of course, point of diversion is very important to an appropriative water right. This definition incorporates points of rediversion. So it would seem to be the case that everywhere in these regulations where there is the identification of a point of diversion, it would also include a point of rediversion, which is quite problematic, particularly for water transfers, where an upstream entity may be releasing water for the downstream buyer, and that downstream buyer's point of at which they take the water has to be added to the upstream water user's water right as a point of rediversion. So it's not at all clear what these regs mean in terms of real-time measuring, what they mean for purposes of reporting water transfers at downstream points of rediversion. Does the upstream seller have to be responsible for measuring in real time the water diverted by the buyer, possibly hundreds of miles downstream? It's simply not clear. And that's because of this basic issue of this definition in 931O. I mean, just points of rediversion should not be included in points of diversion. They should be handled separately because they operate differently. So thank you for the opportunity. And I do want to say I appreciated the board's circulation of the administrative draft a few months ago. It was good to see an administrative draft ahead of time. I really do hope we can fix these couple of issues, though, because they are very significant, particularly the idea that we should be measuring storage accumulation in real time. Reservoirs just don't work that way. And I would refer you, in addition, not only to sections 657 and 658 of the regulations, but also to the Division of Water Rights memorandum about how you license a storage reservoir. That licensing memorandum operates entirely on whether water was in a reservoir for 30 days. It is based on sections 657 and 658, and we should not have a mismatch between how the board goes about identifying diversions and accumulation to storage for licensing purposes from what we have here in measuring and reporting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. That brings us to the end of this list of folks who pre-registered to speak during the comment period. There were some people that weren't present in the Zoom room or didn't raise their hand when their name was called. So I'm going to give a moment for anybody who was missed on this list to raise your hand in the Zoom room, and we'll go through people one by one. And just to walk through the order and the list of folks, that's Drew Boochley, Laura Bradford, Scott Newman, Patricia Chelseth, Kathy Monroe, Chris Kahn, Lee Hodge, Kent Morgan, Michael Walters, Matt Nunez, Amy Raymond, Roger Herring, and Patrick New, who did not speak. So I'll leave some time for folks to raise your hands if you were part of that list and would still like to make a comment. And I see we have one hand raised, so we'll start with that speaker.
Hi, yes, this is Pat New. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry, I was having Zoom connection problems when you called on me earlier, and have now connected by phone. Hopefully it's a little bit more reliable. Yes, my name is Pat New. I'm a water rights engineer with Pacific Gas and Electric Company. As a water user, PG&E holds more than 200 water rights. We're primarily a non-consumptive diverter for hydropower, although some of our projects do make retail and wholesale water deliveries to individual water users and large water agencies for consumptive use. We're providing comments today over our concerns of the impacts these proposed regulations may have if adopted. First, we'd like to acknowledge a couple of the revisions to the most recent proposed regulations. Specifically, the inclusion of hydrographers as qualified individuals and the provision to allow for submittal of aggregated daily data in place of raw hourly. We think those are both great additions. So my comments today are twofold. First, I would like to briefly restate and ask for reconsideration of some of our comments that were provided in our previous letter on the initial proposed changes to the measurement regulations, specifically in reference to registration of measurement devices, data submittal, telemetry exemptions, and timelines for implementation. Second, I'd like to provide more extended remarks on three specific topics, starting with measurement of reservoir outflow. Within the revised proposed updates, Section 933B3B requires water users that operate reservoirs greater than 5,000 acre-feet to measure volume and rate of water withdrawn from the reservoir. PG&E doesn't believe this requirement would provide value in administering or enforcing compliance with water rights. Storage water rights stipulate a volume and season that a reservoir may store during and may store up to, and compliance with these requirements can be determined through measurement of the volume in the reservoir, not measurement outflow. Reservoir outflow often includes bypass flows that cannot be used to determine compliance with storage water rights. Second topic for extended comments is the unavailability of some of the reference materials. Throughout sections 931, 934, and 935 of the revised proposed regulations, there are multiple references to a data standard, a report of measurement methodology form, and a data file template. So it's PG&E's understanding that none of these materials are currently available for review by the public. And without understanding the intricacies of these forms, PG&E and other water users can't fully understand the ramifications of the proposed regulations. Therefore, we would request that the reference materials be made available for review and comment, and the deadline to provide comments on the revised proposed regulations be extended accordingly so the two can happen concurrently. And my last topic for extended comment is on the telemetry by claimed right. These comments will echo other remarks made before, but I nonetheless feel that it's important to say. So section 935D1 requires large diverters to submit data that is apportioned to each claimed right, is separated for each point of diversion under the claimed right, and differentiates between initial diversions and rediversions. Section 935F2 further requires the submission to occur on a weekly basis. However, Section 935D2 allows for the submitted data under Section 935D to be provisional data. Now, provisional data is defined in Section 931 as data that is not yet fully reviewed for quality assurance and not yet apportioned to each claimed right. There's immediate contradiction in these requirements. Nonetheless, PG&E acknowledges the value that the division would gain from receiving fully processed data from water users on a weekly basis, assuming this data has been apportioned to each claim right, separated by point of diversion, and differentiated between initial diversion and rediversion. Undoubtedly, this would be very helpful to the division in determining water availability. However, as others have noted, it's just not possible. For reasons that have already been stated and additional reasons, you have 30-day rule accounting. There's seasonal inaccessibility to high elevation sites. There's other sites with limited accessibility that are located in very remote areas. And then you have the labor required to review, process, and submit this data on a weekly basis. I believe that all of these hurdles are recognized by the division, which is why the division has included the acceptability of provisional data in the requirement. However, PG&E questions the utility of provisional data. The division has identified the lack of utility for unprocessed data or provisional data in numerous reports prepared by the Telemetry Research Unit and in many hearings and other forums. This was echoed again in the staff presentation at the beginning of this hearing by Pablo when he stated the importance of easily interpretable data. Provisional data will be anything but easily interpretable. So if this is true, PG&E does not understand why the division would mandate that water users submit this unusable provisional data on a weekly basis when it has no value. We believe that if adopted, this will only result in high rates of non-compliance and increased burden on water users with no improved outcomes. PG&E encourages the division to put a pause on adopting any further telemetry or data submittal requirements in excess of annual submissions included in the filing of annual reports until a clear path has been identified that is implementable by water users and provides value to the division. We believe that there is a opportunity to work collectively with water users on what data can be provided that would be of value to water users, but what is proposed in the regulations does not fit. PG&E appreciates this opportunity to provide comment and will be submitting a more detailed comment letter by the April 23rd deadline. Thank you, and happy to engage in further discussion.
Thank you very much for your comment. I am not seeing any other hands raised from the folks that were on this list originally. So next I'd like to invite any attendees who didn't previously register with a comment, who would like to speak, to now raise your hands. Please use that raise hand feature that's at the bottom of the Zoom screen to let us know that you have a comment, and we'll ask you to unmute in the order that the hands were raised. When you begin your comment, please state your name and then spell your name for the court reporter, just so that we make sure to have everything captured appropriately. All right, I'll look to our list. First up, we have Justin Fredrickson.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Good morning, or afternoon rather. My name's Justin Fredrickson. I'm a senior policy analyst at the California Farm Bureau. And I have, we submitted some comments on the draft regulation, most of which looks like it's consistent with the stated, general purpose of simplifying, making it, more logical, et cetera, et cetera. Although a lot of it's very complex, and there have been comments made that, that's going to be still going to be challenging for certain diverters. But in terms of that, general purpose, a lot of it, looks potentially beneficial. For example, alternative compliance plans, a lot of that we like. But there's one section that has been discussed very little, and I've not heard any comments today on it, but I think it's significant. It's section 938 dealing with threshold adjustments. And this is the section that one of the staff members earlier stated that this was already part of the existing regulation, Well, if you look at the existing regulation, there's one reference in the telemetry requirements that talks about potentially adjusting the threshold there from, I think it's 10%, potentially downward under certain circumstances, but it's not nearly as kind of far-reaching as what is currently proposed in that new section, in that section 938. And part of what is proposed there involves potentially adjusting thresholds for reporting downward or upwards based on a variety of things, including, I'll read, requirements of any policy decision or order of the board or a court. So something spinning out of a water rights decision or a court decision. And then also the need for diversion or withdrawal of release of measurement information in evaluating how diversions or withdrawals or releases impact public trust resources or water availability. So curtailments or public trust impacts. And also whether a proposed adjustment will unnecessarily injure public trust resources or threatened, endangered, or fully protected aquatic species. So now bringing in ESA listed species considerations as well. So that's going way beyond what's in the existing regulation. And then it also talks about, the way this would be done would be, it sounds like through potentially information orders. And so that's a new authority that the Water Board has under what was SB 389, I think it passed in 2023. It got added into section 1051, which is cited as one of the authorities for this in the proposed regulation. And but that's a whole different thing, not formally ever any part of what, I always understood to be simply implementing SB 88, having uniform required water measurement requirements under various tiers based on size. And this is now opening up a whole new ability for the water board to put out information orders. It could even, the way it's described, it could require extensive studies and ongoing monitoring for 5 years initially, and then could be revised and extended beyond that. There are some kind of due process type things and also some balancing things. The benefit would have to match the burden. And there would be a hearing, and there could also be an opportunity for reconsideration. But my point here is that this is all a major expansion on what started out as just measuring water diversions, and now it's becoming public trust, it's becoming curtailments, it's becoming court decisions, water rights decisions. Can you see how that's a big expansion on what was previously in the regulation? That is my comment. I'm trying to put that down in writing, and we'll be sending those comments in. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. I'll pause here for another 15 or 30 seconds just to give folks time to raise their hands if they're on the Zoom call and they'd like to make a comment. Just a reminder, if you are calling in on the phone to the Zoom platform, you can press *9 to raise your hand that way, and we can unmute you. So I'll take a brief pause here just to wait and see. Want to make sure that we get to hear from everybody today. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participation and your comments, both written and oral. We really appreciate this. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, you can still continue to submit written comments about the proposed regulatory changes for board consideration, and they can be submitted in one of a few different ways. So first, you can send your written comment via email to dwr-measurement@waterboards.ca.gov. It's most helpful for us if you include the subject line comment letter, water measurement, and reporting revisions. in your email, just so that we can note that appropriately. Secondly, you can fax your comment to 916-341-5620. And again, please include that same subject line within the subject of the faxed written comment. Third, you can mail your written comments to Connie Mitterhofer at State Water Resources Control Board, 1001 I Street, Sacramento, California, 95814. And then lastly, you can drop your written comment off at the records room located on the second floor of the Cal EPA headquarters at the address that is listed on the screen there. All of these methods of submitting written public comments are included in the notice of proposed action, which is available on our rulemaking website. This slide deck is also available on the website, and the link to that website will be shown at the end of this hearing on the screen. As a reminder, all written comments must be received by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. Next slide. Okay, here are the major milestones for the regulatory process. The public comment period began at the end of February, and it closes next week at 5 p.m. on April 23rd. If we revise the regulation further based on public comments received, we'll have an additional 15-day comment period. During that 15-day comment period, interested parties would have an additional opportunity to submit written comments based on the new revisions. After the proposed text has been finalized, the Water Board will consider it for adoption. This will be during a regularly scheduled board meeting, likely in August. After the board adopts the regulation text, we will send the final regulatory package to the Office of Administrative Law. The Office of Administrative Law will review the regulatory documents, and if approved, they will file the regulation with the Secretary of State. Based on this schedule, we expect the regulation would take effect in October 2025 to align with the water year annual reporting. This concludes our public hearing. Thank you very much for attending and providing comments on the proposed regulation revisions. Here are links to more information about the water measurement and reporting regulation. The first link and QR code will take you to our rulemaking webpage where regulatory documents can be found. This meeting's recording and slides will be posted on the rulemaking webpage in a few days. The second link and QR code will take you to the water measurement and reporting regulation webpage. There you will find information on the existing regulations and compliance assistance. On either site, you can subscribe to our email list to be notified of any updates regarding our rulemaking process and information on the water measurement and reporting regulation. You can also contact us at the email address and phone number listed here. Lastly, please remember to provide any written comments about the proposed regulation by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. We hope that this hearing was informative, and we thank you for your comments and your participation. We'll be leaving this slide up for about a minute in case anybody needs to write down a website or take a photo of the QR code. But this does conclude the end of the hearing. Thank you very much for your attendance and your participation.